I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. I've been thinking that Robert Malone makes an honest man out of Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval tells us the truth about the Great Reset agenda, and we hate him for it. Robert Malone tells us what we want to hear, and he's well loved. He tells us it's all going to be okay because there are smart, competent people who are in charge. Some of them in government, many of them in medicine, some in law, some in finance. They're all getting together and they're going to lead us into this next truth-telling. Hooray! On a thread of the last episode, New York Music Daily and I were discussing our mutual admiration for Tessalina, who I love. He was saying that she was on the forefront of the depopulation agenda, and that was why he felt that she had so much integrity. And I agreed, but said it confused me to why she and Robert F. Kennedy didn't challenge Malone on this. His response was that he felt that she, as he did, thought that we are in an all-out war and it is all hands on deck and it doesn't serve to turn around and shoot your own troops. And to that I responded, the question is whether Robert Malone is on the enemy's side and a traitor pretending to be part of the opposition. I'm not answering that question, I'm just defining it. If he is, and we don't ask the question out of politeness or a desire for unity, we're following a general who's been coordinating with the enemy from the beginning, who will speak for us and coordinate the terms of our surrender, apology, fixing mRNA, reparations to the injured. And you, I, and Tessa agree that the medical agenda is depopulation. So we're not talking about ideological differences. We're explaining the evidence to figure out whether Robert Malone is on the side of mass and indiscriminate murder. I'm not saying he is. I'm saying the question needs to be examined, or we also become complicit out of a desire not to offend. If Robert Malone stands with you, I, Tessa, RFK, Tess Lowry, and many, many others against the depopulation agenda, he should be more than eager to explain how he was fooled into participating in it for so many years, with the Merck Ebola vaccine, the e-cigarettes DoD prototype, the failure of the domain system to test hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, and his agreement not to warn about mRNA as a professional courtesy. He should apologize for calling the Breggins and others who see this agenda kooky conspiracy theorists. And one more thing, we're not turning around and firing on our own troops. Malone is the leading vaccine critic to the rest of the world, not one of the troops. Questioning whether we should be his troops and get in line behind him isn't the same as firing at him. When I look at the turning point of sovereignty movements that almost won in history, it was always a betrayal from within that brought them down, not the known enemy. So that's what's on the line here, and the 25 million is the least of it. In India, the leader of the opposition party has just been filed for defamation and given 2 years, which is the amount of time that it takes to take someone out of Congress and make sure they can't run again. And what was it that he said? Several years ago, he compared Modi to a thief. So that's what we let into the door with defamation suits, and not ones that are against major media outlets, but ones that are against two people who have risked their lives fighting against the pharmafia, as Matthew Crawford calls it. In my last episode, which I did on Substack but didn't record for YouTube, I look at the progression of the 4 articles that the Breggins wrote responding to Desmond's theory of mass formation, to which Malone has added psychosis. Now, I know a lot of people who feel like that's a really useful theory, and it really spoke to them to understand what was happening. I think that as someone who went through 4 years of graduate school in a social and personality psych, I think that behavioral psychology that looks at how actions begin and then beliefs follow with cognitive dissonance, so that especially if someone's been coerced into doing something that may have disastrous consequences, they're really motivated not to see it that way. So I'll link to my episode on cognitive dissonance to look further at that at the end. I recommend that everyone go to that episode and read the links to those articles for themselves, because the Breggins have written beautifully and very insightful essays on why this is a dangerous theory. In the first one, they only talk about the ideology, and they talk about how people have been subjected to really terrible abuse in order to do the lockdowns and the masking and the social isolation and the fear. And these are things that have been done to them, not things that they've done to themselves. In the second, they say, well, it seems like Malone doesn't understand how destructive this is, not just to us, but to the entire health freedom movement. And so they give him the benefit of the doubt that he's just not seeing it. By the third one, Malone has doubled down in terms of calling them black-pilled extremists, not specifically, but people like them who believe in these kinds of crazy conspiracy theories. So it's only by the fourth article that they have failed in order to have a conversation about these as ideas, and instead have to conclude that this is intentional, that Malone is not seeing what they're saying because he is putting forward his own agenda. They speculate as to what that might be, and using his CV and his history as evidence, they conclude that possibly he may become the director of a federal health organization sometime in the future. And at that point, what would follow from that with not seeing this larger agenda? Is that hypothesis defamatory? In a January 2021 article called Dr. Robert Malone Suing the Washington Post, the We Love Trump website ran a poll. Do you support Malone replacing Fauci? So that's not something that he's denied. It can hardly be called defamation. What are some of the questions and research that we might want to look at? One that occurred to me is, who is the prosecuting attorney for Malone, that he describes as very experienced in defamation cases and who represents many of the physicians involved in the medical freedom movement? And what else has he done for Malone and others? From the Daily Beast, Inside the Anti-Vaxxer Civil War. In response to the allegations, Malone hired Stephen Biss, a popular defamation attorney for right-wing figures like former Representative Devin Nunes. In a September 26 letter to Ruby and two allied conspiracy theorists, Biss demanded retractions of claims like Ruby's allegation that Malone's connections are 100% CIA. Biss also requested an unspecified financial payment to Malone in the letter to make up for the deep state insinuations. If the accusations aren't pulled back by the end of October, Biss warned in the letter, Malone will sue. So 1 month prior, Malone and Biss filed an identical lawsuit against the Washington Post for $50 million for defamation, plus that same $350,000 in punitive damages, plus 6% with a jury demanded. The language is the same throughout. And Biss also represented Devin Nunes from AboveTheLaw.com Devin Nunes loses yet again in his chaotic sensorial slapcases. For a while there in 2019, it seemed like a month couldn't go by without then Representative Devin Nunes suing some critic or another, including somewhat infamously a satirical cow. After kicking it off by suing mocking livestock, he quickly moved on to suing news organizations. A big one was suing CNN, a favored punching bag of Republicans, which he sued in December of 2019. It didn't go well. So the cow referenced was a satirical @DevinCow account for which Nunes and Biss were suing Twitter for $250 million. Next question. What does the lawsuit define as the core defamation? From Malone's post, Just the Facts, the gist of the defamatory statements and implications is that Dr. Malone lacks the character and is unfit to be a medical doctor and scientist. Now, to my knowledge, Malone has never practiced as a medical physician. And I think that the Breggins think he's very fit to be a scientist for the NIH. They think he's exactly suited for that job. So it seems like from this wording that Biss would need to prove that their statements meant that he was unfit for that, rather than being unfit to lead the medical freedom movement or the anti-vaccine movement. Third question. What are the Breggins' implied allegations, and are those valid concerns? It seems to me, without any insider knowledge, that what the Breggins are implying is that Malone still represents the interest of the organizations with which he's been affiliated his entire career. The NIH, Active, HHS, CDC, FDA, WHO, DOD, CIA, Big Pharma, Big Philanthropy, global vaccines, and bioweapons. In Malone's interview with Dr. Joseph Mercola, reprinted on Children's Health Defense, he states, "I have historically worked with people who have been truly deep state intelligence community. I have decades of experience in biodefense. I have been deep in the belly of the beast. I have won literally billions of dollars for my clients in grants and contracts. I have managed hundreds of millions of dollars in grants and contracts in the vaccine space. As study section chair or key study section member on many $100+ million contract reviews for typically the NIH, but also DOD, I have historically been deeply embedded in this whole enterprise. I know it upside down. I understand this system. So, I think the concerns that I could be controlled opposition are valid. I think that it's appropriate to acknowledge the basis for those concerns. Now, those concerns, I think, are refuted by my behaviors and actions. So whether he thinks that his behaviors refute it is an opinion, the same as the Breggins' opinion that they do not. But the concern he acknowledges is valid. Next question. Has Robert Malone given conflicting information about his past? This is all from Sage Hannah's article, The Malone Clip on Joe Rogan versus the Daily Beast. From the Daily Beast article, despite Malone's popularity with anti-vaccine activists, he's still managed to piss off many of the biggest anti-vax conspiracy theorists over his refusal to back their nuttiest suppositions. Two of the loudest voices in that community, right-wing shock jock Stu Peters and pro-Trump personality Dr. Jane Ruby, have settled on the story that Malone is actually working with the CIA. The rift appears to have started after Peters produced a supposed expose called Watch the Water. Borrowing themes from Dr. Strangelove's conspiracy-addled general, Peters' film baselessly alleges that snake venom has somehow been planted in the nation's water supply and within COVID-19 vaccines to inject recipients with satanic DNA. Malone was quick to denounce the film. He said Peters' theory lacked any scientific evidence and is flat out wrong. Malone has even described Peters as a conspiracy theorist, fighting words in the anti-vax community. And so Peters has been punching back. In recent weeks, the far-right radio host has been telling a story about a time Malone supposedly made contact with ex-CIA official Michael Callahan. According to Peters, Callahan called Malone on January 4, 2020, from Wuhan, China. Callahan warned Malone that he had to get his team spun up to respond to the coronavirus outbreak. I have been sustaining just continuous attacks from the conspiracy theorists. Stu is just one of them, he told the Daily Beast. However, when it comes to the CIA agent accusations, Malone said those statements from Peters are unfounded and not grounded in reality. I don't think Stu would know a real CIA agent if it bit him, he said. While the name-calling and insults have grown more intense recently, Malone insists that Peters remains committed to bending facts and distorting reality. And then Sage Hannah follows that with the excerpt from Dr. Malone on the Joe Rogan Experience from December 31st, 2021, where he says, "There is a CIA agent that I've co-published with in the past named Michael Callahan. He was in Wuhan in the fourth quarter of 2019. He called me from Wuhan on January 4th, 2020. To the Daily Beast reporter, Malone says that Stu Peters' CIA allegations are unfounded and not grounded in reality, and that he wouldn't know a CIA agent if it bit him. But to Joe Rogan, he confirmed Peters' supposed evidence, as he also did in his interview with Aubrey Marcus. So great thanks to Sage Hannah, because I am only following those links and then the links within the links." And my last question is, does Robert Malone engage in the practices over which he's suing? On his Twitter account yesterday, he posted, "If you or your organization traffic in hate and defamation, then I cannot support you, no matter how worthy your cause may be. Online hate and malicious defamation are both wrong and fundamentally evil." If I count the insults that were in the media pieces that I quoted, I get black-pilled, anti-vax conspiracy theorist, nuttiest suppositions, conspiracy-addled, bending facts, and distorting reality. As opposed to this, I get the Breggins' 3 respectful attempts to clarify why the Desmond Malone theory demeans those who thoughtfully examine the roots of totalitarianism and encourages those who wish to ridicule and condemn them. Then, when they failed to get a response from him expressing what Malone himself has termed valid concerns that he could be controlled opposition, and saying that he thinks it's appropriate to acknowledge the basis for those concerns, but instead of acknowledging that, Malone has sued the Breggins for asking the question and presenting their evidence, all of which is grounded in fact and which he's not refuting. Yet this isn't the only way that I think Malone traffics in encouraging ridicule, hate, and condemnation. One of my readers pointed out his participation with J.P. Sears in the high-res rap video of 2 + 2 = 5. This features a bearded man wearing a blue wig and a skirt who's teaching a class of grown men. And it ridicules not only transgender people, but also anyone who would defend them, and holds them responsible for the corruption of children and possible mutilation. And in this, I think we're entering a whole new era of the potential for violence. And I continue to believe that the Pfizer expose that Malone endorsed was a sham, was staged, with its young gay VP of Research and Development who's going and calling the police because I don't feel safe, there's too many white people around. That was such a caricature. It's so insulting. So if someone that you love was killed or injured by the virus or the vaccine, don't blame those global predators that the black-pilled Breggins expose. Instead, blame a gay, blame a transgender, blame a black, blame a liberal. And if they're successful, blame them for taking your job, for taking your education. I think that the woke agenda was a way to manipulate us, and I'll link one of my videos that makes that point. But I also think that the anti-woke is a way that we're being manipulated, and I am seeing so much of this coming out in the communities online that I participate in. I want to end with a personal story for how this plays out. My daughter's husband tragically lost his mom 2 weeks after their wedding, and her memorial service was this past weekend. They had an all-day event that went into the night with a considerable amount of drinking. A couple of male cousins, who clearly had had too much, started railing against gays and trans and how they were ruining the country. Another guest was a lesbian who had been taken into the family by the mom and had become their adopted daughter. And so, in addition to her losing her spiritual mother, who always supported and accepted her, she also was facing a double mastectomy for a cancer that had killed her actual mother. And into that are these two knuckleheads who are just spouting off the kinds of things that I think this kind of mean, funny stuff inspires. So that only didn't reach a fist fight because a neighbor intervened and because they invoked the wishes of the deceased mom, and also because the agitators passed out. I think that these are the kinds of things that we're encouraging. And I once got so taken in by Robert Malone quoting the Grateful Dead and saying, "Be kind." But it is not kind to ridicule people and to sue people for asking legitimate questions and to stir up all of this hostility and distrust of other people rather than putting that where it belongs with the global predators. To follow up, here is a lively episode on wokeness versus the void on Kehinde Andrews and Candace Owens, and this one is cognitive dissonance. Thank you for listening.